Well, Brad, thanks very much for coming on.
Hey, no problem, man.
And
Glad
then,
you're a Hughes. I have to do anything for a Hughes, because my family is a Hughes family as well. My grandparents were Hugheses, so I feel like we have some kind of kinship.
and if we just confirmed anyone listening to this, you're not Sam Roberts.
You know what? I am not Sam Roberts, and I don't know. I don't get that comparison. I've gotten that a few times. People say that we sound similar. I don't hear it at all. I've had the privilege of being on Sam's show a couple of times with Booker, and to me, we sound completely different. But I am not Sam Roberts, damn
Yeah, I don't get it at all. I just think it's because you're two white guys that love wrestling.
it.
And more discrimination.
Yes, discriminatory.
Oh.
How dare I be compared to Sam Roberts?
But so I'm going to ask you this question. This is something I've thought about myself recently. Do you think that over the past 12 months that wrestling in general has become bigger than MMA?
Bigger than MMA. It's hard to say. I think wrestling over the last 12 months has definitely gotten much larger. When you look at the $1 billion deal that WWE just did with the Fox network here in the States for SmackDown, $200 million a year over 5 years, that's incredible. And some of the other auxiliary deals that have been going on with WWE and also with this All In show that just happened, to do 11,000 people for an independent wrestling show definitely shows a rise in the popularity of the sport. But I did just hear that the UFC has been reevaluated at being worth $7 billion, and just what was that 3 years ago or less? It was sold for $4 billion. So the growth of UFC is incredible as well, and the sport of MMA I think is as popular as it's ever been. But my thing about MMA is I think it's finally hit its ceiling. I think that the UFC especially this year, has had a lack of super entertaining fights. And I think that Dana White has carried the company as far as he can. And now they need to start thinking more outside the box and try to figure out how to get more of a national appeal, mainstream appeal to their sport and how to create new stars. The thing about WWE and pro wrestling is always creating new stars. There are always new people ascending to the top. There's always big names circulating around professional wrestling, names from the past, present, and future. And I think that's why wrestling will always be in that conversation. But as far as surpassing the popularity, to get back to your original question, I don't think that they've done it just yet, especially on a mainstream level. But I think that they're close.
Because for me, it's just that like if you look at with New Japan and they do stadium shows, and apparently in Australia, wrestling's really going through a big boom period at the minute.
Yeah,
But
and in the UK.
oh, it's enormous in the UK again. But especially in Scotland, there's a Scottish company there alone that does arena shows, which is incredible.
Wow, that is crazy. It's crazy just because you always hear just about the WWE, but there are so many different promotions that are doing incredible things. I talked about All In. I know World of Wrestling over there is pretty big. There are definitely some companies there in Perth and Sydney that I know are doing great. And here in Texas, where I am right now in Houston, Texas, in the United States, we have Reality of Wrestling, and Reality of Wrestling, the promotion that's ran by Booker T. We draw great crowds, and we have our own arena, the World Gym Arena out there in Texas City, and we have a big event this Saturday, September the 8th, which is going to be our first show after our live pay-per-view on Fight TV. So wrestling all over has its pockets, and it has an incredible fan base, and I think that it is growing, and I think it will catch the UFC. Here's the thing: it's just like with any sport; they have rise and falls in popularity. At one time, stateside, baseball was the most popular sport. Then it transitioned to football. Now it's kind of going back to baseball and basketball. It's going to be the same thing. Boxing was the biggest sport. Wrestling overtook it. MMA overtook wrestling, and then UFC will fall back and WWE will rise again.
Do you think that it's fair to say that UFC, it's well, obviously not that it's failing, but it's kind of running out of big money matches?
Absolutely. I mean, they got to go back to the WWE well in order to get any buzz around their fights. And when I say that, I mean the biggest buzz the UFC has had in the year 2018 is when Brock Lesnar showed up at that UFC fight with Daniel Cormier and Stipe Miocic, and he shoved Daniel Cormier across the room. And now going into 2019, the biggest fight on the calendar is Brock Lesnar versus DC. I think also the big money fights are fleeting because how many fights will Conor McGregor actually fight? I know that Conor over there is the biggest star, and I love Conor McGregor. He's got this fight with Khabib Nurmagomedov. I don't know how it's going to go. I am Team McGregor on that one, even though Khabib's a dangerous guy. But as far as big money fights, after Khabib, I think Conor might have a big. Let's face it, Conor would be big money with anybody. But I'm just thinking about marquee record-breaking fights. I think you got the trilogy fight with Nate Diaz. But who the hell knows what's going on with Nate Diaz on a day-to-day basis? And then DC says he's retiring in March. John Jones is still up in the air. We don't know if we're going to see him again. If Brock wins the heavyweight championship, I think that opens up some big money fights in the UFC. But they've lost Ronda. She's obviously doing great in WWE. I don't think Conor's going to have more than 3 more fights at maximum in the UFC. I think Brock, if he wins the title, might have 3 more fights in the UFC, and that's maybe. And that's if he wins. So I agree. They're running out of the big name fights. I'm looking at this card going down on Saturday, and you've got Darren Till and Tyron Woodley, and that's the only fight on there that I even know who's fighting. Like if you look at the card this Saturday from their Dallas, Texas event, I don't know anybody on that card. There are no big fights. And Tyron Woodley, as good as he is, I don't think he's a draw.
But I would also say, and this is sort of insider news, is that I think UFC starting to, the plans are to start going international. And the reason why I say that is I have a family member who works for a promotion company here. And she told me that there's been talks with the UFC executives about a Conor McGregor fight at Croke Park Stadium next year.
Oh wow! Well, that would be a big money fight right there.
Yeah, that holds 85,000 people, and if you're charging like $100, $200 per seat, like that's at least $200,000.
Yeah, and what city is that in?
Dublin City.
That's in Dublin. Yeah, so I mean, it would kill. It would kill. It would be probably the biggest fight in the world's history.
Yeah, and it doesn't even like they could announce that fight, just Conor McGregor fighting in Dublin, first time in years. It's sold out.
Yeah, it'd sell out immediately. There's no question about it.
Oh, that's a fortune in itself. But Brad, I gotta ask you. So you run your own podcast, and of course you co-host Heated Conversations with the great Booker T. But how is it for you as an interviewer when you realize that an interview is going badly?
So it's happened to me a couple of times. I've been more fortunate than not. Most guys are pretty good, or girls who I've talked to over the years. I've been in online radio, podcast, and over the air radio now for 7-8 years. So I've had hundreds of people I've talked to. When it's going bad, you just try your best to pull out everything you can. And I find myself, I'm turning up my energy more, trying to overcompensate for the lack of interest in the interview. And I think that, as they say in wrestling, you just go home. You go home as quick as you can, count 1, 2, 3, get the hell out of there. Because there's nothing like, here's the thing about airtime too, and I've learned this from being on the radio with Booker, is, airtime is expensive and it's worth its weight in gold. And you don't want to dedicate more time than you have to a segment or to a interviewee that's not worth it. So go home, tell them, hey, I appreciate you for stopping by. Cut them off as soon as you can and get the hell out of there.
Yeah, because it was a couple of months ago on Heated Conversations when Sue Young was on.
Yeah.
And it was awkward, shall we say?
Well, Sue's great, and I don't recall the interview too well. I remember that was the same show where we had all the women from the Ladies Night Out show that we did here in Houston. We also had Corey Graves on that episode as well.
Oh yeah,
broke the news. Yeah, which I'd love to talk about if you have a question about that. But as far as that, Sue Young, by the way, is one of the most welcoming and warm people when you meet her in person. She came down to World Gym Arena one time before for Reality Wrestling. I think she's coming back in November, and I'm looking forward to it. She's nothing but fun. But those phone interviews are difficult too, man. They're a whole different beast. I love the in-person interview, but sometimes those phoners are the easiest way to do it. Is obviously when we're across the Atlantic or what have you. It's difficult to get in the same room. But like I just had Bruce Buffer, the voice of the UFC, on my show, and it was a great interview, and it was over the phone. So you have to develop a skill for that as well.
Have you ever heard the Chris Jericho podcast that he did with Mike Tyson?
No, I don't think I did that. But I will say, as much as I love Mike Tyson, he's kind of, and I love Ric Flair too. But some of these guys have had so much life experience that I don't think they know what to say anymore. Or they go off topic. Or the thing about Mike Tyson interviews is he seems like he'll just answer it in like two words. He's like, "That's right," and then it's just, "All right, well, let's move on to the next question."
There's an interview he did with the great comedian Norm Macdonald recently, and during the whole interview, Mike was eating out of this big giant bowl of nuts. So it was just, and if that was anybody else, who would have said, "Get the fuck off my set." But it was like, "Would you like some water with your nuts, Mike?"
Norm Macdonald is great. And it's
hey, thanks for that,
Yeah, there you go. His talk show is funny. He had Jim Carrey on that show too, and it was wild.
It's back on in 10 days.
Okay, awesome. Well, I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, so that brings me to another question I'd love to ask. What are your dream guests you'd love to have on your podcast?
I'm big into the movie Back to the Future, so I'd love to have Christopher Lloyd. Christopher Lloyd would be way at the top of my list. Michael J. Fox, of course, as well. My grandmother, who was Jerry Hughes, so part of the Hughes clan, she passed away a couple years ago, and from Parkinson's disease, and of course Michael J. Fox suffers from the same ailment. So I've done some stuff for him. I've donated to his foundation. I'd love to talk to Michael J. Fox. From the wrestling side of things, I would definitely like to talk to Steve Austin. I know there's been conversations over the last, maybe month about him coming on Heated Conversations or us going on the Steve Austin show. I'd love to have Steve Austin on. And I think that the greatest of all, I think the one interview I think I'd love to have is with Larry David. I love Larry David. He's incredible. I would love for him just to make me look like an idiot, because that's what he does to people who are interviewing him. He did this great talk with the New York Times. I'll send you a link. It was so hilarious. There was somebody trying to ask him a question, and he was just making a complete ass out of him. So Larry David would probably be way up on my list too.
Have you seen the interview? I'm sure you have, where he was asked a bunch of random questions, and somebody says, "If you were on death row, what would your last meal be?"
No, I didn't hear. What was his answer?
A dog.
What?
Yeah, does he even eat a dog?
I guess, why the hell not? Only Larry David would say something like that.
If I could pick any two people to interview, and this is the interviewer to go drinking with, whatever, one would be Vince McMahon.
Yeah.
And the other would be Jack Nicholson.
Oh, those are two great choices too. I think Jack Nicholson could probably tell you a lot more interesting stories off air than on.
I'd say Vince McMahon could tell you stories that would make your eye color change.
Yeah. I have such respect for Vince McMahon, and I don't know how he's viewed, overseas at all. But as far as stateside, I put him up there with the Steve Jobs, the Walt Disneys, the Henry Fords, the great creators of our time, even the P.T. Barnums. The man took a industry that was a literal sideshow that would be next to the booths of the bearded lady and the two-headed man, and he made it into a multi-billion-dollar industry that's enjoyed by people in hundreds of countries around the world, and it made pro wrestling into a legitimate form of entertainment. I think the guy does not get enough credit in the mainstream. One of the things that the President of the United States called Vince the other day on his birthday was one of the greats, and that's one of the things that I could definitely agree with the President of the United States on. Vince McMahon is definitely one of the greats.
Does it bother you as a wrestling fan? Because obviously we just had All In, and it was like one of the biggest things in recent memory in wrestling. But does it bother you when you see these fans online talking crap and like, oh, WWE, it stinks and it's all this, but then they would cut their wrists for WrestleMania tickets?
You know, oh man, that's a hard question to answer because I myself am a wrestling fan, right? But I've also worked in wrestling for the past 6 years with Booker at Reality Wrestling, and it's the wrestling fan is one of the most difficult creatures to figure out. Especially the wrestling fan that fancies themselves as very knowledgeable about the business. The constant complaining is irritating to me because I'm a WWE guy. Like I watch WWE. I don't really watch a lot of the other independent wrestling. I'll catch a match here or there. Obviously, I'm plugged into reality of wrestling, but I'm a WWE guy. So if I don't like something, like you were telling me you were watching Luke Cage,
Yeah.
right? On Netflix. It's not the new season is not very good, right? So I don't watch it. If it's not very good, I just don't watch it. So I'll never understand why somebody hates something or dislikes something or complains about something so much that they don't like that yet they continue to watch it. That I just don't understand at all. And the same people who will say Vince McMahon's out of touch or he doesn't get it, would openly, if they saw him on the street, would openly beg and plead him for a job or to take a picture or for anything. So it is an interesting, it's a really interesting dichotomy wrestling fans have. But it just goes back to me. If you don't like something or if something upsets you so much that you will rant incessantly on social media and online about it, I don't know why you watch it. I don't know why you watch it. And I also don't know why. Here's the thing. With any other story, with any other television show, I don't watch the television show trying to figure out which ways they could possibly go with it. But they do that in wrestling. It's like, well, it should be booked this way, and then it should lead to this and lead to that, or do this and this and that. It's like, well, why sit there and try to rewrite a television show that you have no control over? Watch the television show, and if you don't like it, you don't like it. That's fine. But you shouldn't say, oh, they should have done this or they should have done that, because at the end of the day, you don't try to do that with any other television show. And I always think that these shows are like, the Seinfeld finale. And the finale of Seinfeld was watched by, I don't know, 125 million people here in the United States. I'm sure even more around the world. And everybody had in their head what they wanted the finale to be. And that's why the finale was seen as such a disappointment to a lot of fans, because it didn't fulfill what they saw in their head, right? When I watched the Seinfeld finale, my brain was turned off. I just watched it and I enjoyed it for what it was. Was it my favorite episode? No. But did I enjoy it? Yeah, because I turned my brain off and I just sat there and watched and took in what they gave me. And that's what I do with WWE on a weekly basis. I'm not saying that I like everything that the company does. I'm not saying that I enjoy every show. But I turn my brain off, I watch it, and I enjoy what I enjoy. And if I don't like it, I'll flip the channel to something else. I just think that's what wrestling fans should do, and they would be much more happy.
But I've got to say, it was a mistake to not have a scene where Kramer went up on the witness stand. I thought that was.
You know what? That is one thing that they dropped the ball on.
Like, he could have go to put his hand in the Bible and then he slipped and accidentally slapped the judge or whatever.
That's a good idea. I would have liked to see that.
But that Larry David and Jerry Seinfeld, they really should give us a call sometime that we could teach them a few things.
Right. They need to learn. They need to learn from the best. They're falling. They're slacking.
They're tramps. but regarding all this stuff about predictions, and I know you were saying you don't really like to think ahead, but what do you see happening, or what do you predict happening in for WrestleMania 35?
I think that there's a couple ways you go about it. I definitely see Ronda and Charlotte happening. I know that's been long rumored, but when I saw Ronda Rousey at WrestleMania this year, I was like, oh my God, her and Charlotte would tear the house down. So I think we see that. I don't know if it's the main event or the co-main event. I think that if there would ever be a main event in WWE history for the women who could main event WrestleMania, I think it'd be that match. I don't see any other match being able to do it. From the men, it's interesting. I think that we see I would like to see Daniel Bryan and The Miz for the WWE Championship. If they could do that, I think they could figure out a way to get there with Miz beating AJ Styles. Of course, that would
Oh,
mean Samoa Joe wouldn't win the title, but he could get his moment in the sun after Daniel Bryan wins it, and maybe Joe takes it off Bryan. But I would love to see The Miz as the WWE champion lose the championship to Daniel Bryan at WrestleMania. And I would, depending on what happens with Brock in January, we know Heyman said that he'd like to cash in his number one contendership, and Kurt was like, "Well, I'll tell you when and where." But if Brock is able to win the UFC heavyweight title, I think he has to be in line for the Universal Championship again. I know that would probably upset a lot of wrestling fans, but just to be able to make history by being the first ever UFC and WWE heavyweight champion simultaneously, I think that's something that WWE should not pass up on.
what would you think about Triple H versus Drew McIntyre?
Well, Drew McIntyre is an absolute stud. And I like that they put the tag team titles on him and Ziggler, built up his legitimacy. Triple H versus Drew McIntyre, I mean, I'd like to see where they go from a storyline perspective, but I think they'd have a hell of a match. And that's one thing. Drew is looked at like just a big guy, but he's way more than a big guy. This guy understands wrestling. He gets it from a psychology standpoint. He's so much better now than he was 3 years ago. And I think that he's got world champion written all over him.
And there's another match that I predict happening. And I know you said Daniel Bryan versus The Miz, but I'm predicting Daniel Bryan versus AJ Styles versus Rey Mysterio.
At WrestleMania.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, that would be interesting. I know the rumor is Rey's coming back, and he's competed in triple threat matches before at WrestleMania for a championship. I think it was him, Edge, and Angle, or him, Randy Orton, and Angle for the world title, something like that at WrestleMania. So Rey Mysterio, if you didn't see All In, the guy is still so impressive. I got the chance to actually spend some time with Rey down here in Houston, and Booker and I went to Top Golf and hung out for a few hours, and I got to chat with Rey, and he's one of the most humble guys, and I think one of the guys who, when you have those all-time conversations of who's the greatest of all time, I really think that he gets overlooked a lot as far as an all-time great. I think Booker gets overlooked a shit ton as being an all-time great, because I think Booker's a top 15 guy all time, and I don't think he gets the proper credit. I saw some idiotic list, by the way, that put him as the second worst world champion in WWE history. I don't know. Yeah, I was like, y'all are a bunch of idiots. Obviously, it comes from upbringing. Your parents are probably idiots too. But I don't see that at all. I think King Booker is one of the best runs in SmackDown history. So, but as far as Rey Mysterio at WrestleMania, I love Rey back in WWE. I think that if that would be the match they would have, it'd be an excellent match.
I'd imagine that would be a triple threat of baby faces.
Yeah. I mean, you would have to, but it would just be one of those athletic contests of who's the best wrestler,
And plus, on top of that, and as much as I love them, and I think AJ Styles is one of the greatest in history, but it's AJ Styles, Daniel Bryan, and Rey Mysterio. They're still great, but they're not as good as they were.
Right.
So by putting them in a triple threat, that would give them time to rest up.
Yeah, no, it's a good idea from a booking standpoint. I think AJ Styles still right now is the best wrestler in the world. I think he'll probably go down as one of the top 5 in-ring workers of all time. I don't think that he's surpassed Shawn Michaels yet. He could. I think he's going to have to do a lot more in a short amount of time to surpass Shawn, because Shawn got to perform on the biggest stage for so many years, and AJ's only been there for a handful. But AJ Styles is a damn good wrestler. Rey Mysterio still got some left in the tank. Daniel Bryan, since his return, I don't know. I felt like there's something missing with him. I don't know what it is, but he's still great. He's still Daniel Bryan. So I'd like to see that match at WrestleMania or anywhere else.
I'm actually really glad that you said about Booker T being underrated, because that was actually going to be one of the things I was going to say to you, is that I think that despite Booker T's success and his money and the fact that he's married to Charmel is his wife.
Yeah.
But I think he's the most underrated wrestler ever. Like, you never really see him mentioned on the list.
Yeah, no, I agree, man. I think Booker. Here's the thing. So prior to me working with Booker, Booker was one of my favorite wrestlers. He was a Houston guy. I knew he was a Houston guy. We actually live in the same suburban area of Houston, and I knew that. I never ran into him, but I knew he was in my area. And my first ever live event, WWE live event, the main event was King Booker versus Rey Mysterio for the world title.
Oh,
my
nice.
second live event was the first Night of Champions pay-per-view, where Booker was in the main event with, I think, John Cena, Mick Foley, Bobby Lashley, and I think Randy Orton for the title. I think that was the match. So he was always around in the wrestling world. But before I worked with him, even though he's one of my favorites, I never thought of him in the GOAT conversation. And then when I started working with Booker, I was like, well, let me go back and look at his, let me look at his catalog. Let me look at his discography or his filmography in wrestling, if you will. And the guy has had one of the greatest runs in professional wrestling history, bar none. Not only was he the second black wrestler of all time to win a world championship in WCW, he was the first African-American to win a heavyweight championship in WWE. I know there's some still like contention about The Rock. Does he count? Does he not count? But as far as full-blooded, black wrestlers, Booker was the first to do that. He was the first to do a lot of things. And when you look at his career, he's a 6-time world champion. He's a 13-time tag champion with, I think, 4 or 5 different partners. Harlem Heat was one of the top 3 greatest teams in WCW history. I think that Booker's run as King Booker puts him on the Mount Rushmore of SmackDown. I think that from a technical wrestling ability, you don't find too many guys who are at the quality. Booker in his prime, as far as a technical wrestler, was just as good as anybody else. And I'll tell you who can back me up on that. That's Bret the Hitman Hart. Because I asked Bret, how good was Booker T in the ring? He says, as good as anybody has ever been. So from a technical aspect, from an entertainment aspect, Booker as King Booker or working with Goldust or being able to cut entertaining promos. I always go to that WrestleMania 21 promo he did with Eddie Guerrero where they spoofed Quentin Tarantino, Pulp Fiction. Booker was a utility guy. No matter what position you put him in, no matter what position in the card he was in, no matter what character he was playing, who he was wrestling, he would always give you 125% and be the best thing, or if not the best, one of the best things on the show for the entire night. Technical wrestler, entertainment value, promos, memorability. Booker T hits every category that you want to be able to hit as a pro wrestler. So he is without a doubt one of the all-time greats. There's not any debate about it.
And he likes Billy Idol.
And he likes Billy Idol. I mean, come on now. And he likes the Eagles.
I met Billy Idol in a bar in Dublin, and he was more weed than human. He was so stoned, it was unbelievable. But yeah, but I think.
And Booker likes Billy Idol. So yeah, there you go.
There you go. I think Booker is by far the greatest black wrestler that's ever lived.
Yes.
But just as we're wrapping up here, Brad, I've got to tell you this Booker T story.
All right, lay it on me.
So it was a SmackDown show in Belfast, and it was King Booker versus, I think it was Lashley or Benoit. It's hard to tell, Lashley and Benoit look so similar,
Absolutely identical.
And everybody knows the stereotype of Irish people is that they're drunk and they can be bigoted and stuff like that. So Booker was doing his entrance as King Booker, and he's doing, the pinky up and the royal thing, and he's playing up to the crowds. So this drunk guy was in the front row, I should say the front of the entrance hall. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how, but he leaned right over the railing, and I'm not saying the word, but he yelled maybe like half a foot from Booker T's face, and he yells, "You effing N-word." And Booker T just sort of broke character, took his crown off, took his wig, cape off.
His cape, yeah.
And he just turned around and eyeballed this guy. And this guy literally, and I know how people misuse the word literally and how annoying it can be. This guy literally went green and his legs wobbled and he almost passed out. And his friends dragged him away because they were like, he's going to kill you.
Yeah. Well, that is definitely not a good thing to say to anybody, let alone somebody who can, kill you with his pinky finger. But Booker, about that word though, Booker advocates very strongly against that word in use of any kind. We've talked about it extensively on our show. Everyone remembers the famous Booker T blooper, which he calls his biggest regret, and it's definitely not a word that should ever be used by anybody, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, but I just thought that it's a shame that guy get dragged out because if Booker T had smacked him, he'd still be in the hospital.
Yeah, he probably would be in a coma. He wouldn't have been able to wake up. And Booker, this was, what did you say, like maybe 10 years ago, maybe? 10 years ago?
2006, maybe.
2006. So, 12 years ago. Booker is still in the same exact shape that he was 12 years ago. So if he ever runs into that guy again and we're somewhere in the Ireland area, make sure you point him out so Booker can give him his receipt.
I'll make sure I'm filming
it. You do that.
Okay, well, do you want to plug your social media there?
Yeah, you can follow me on all social media at Brad Gilmore. That's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all that stuff. Even if you still have MySpace, you can find me on there, I'm sure, somewhere. And check out Heated Conversations every weekend with Booker T and myself. You can also check out the Brad Gilmore Show, where I interview people that I either know or admire or appreciate every single week. We had Bruce Buffer on this week. We had Phil Hellmuth, who's the greatest poker player of all time, on a couple weeks ago. Always entertaining people. So check out the Brad Gilmore Show on wherever you get your podcast.